The air in Grandpa Richard's study was thick with the scent of old money and even older books. Dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight that pierced the heavy velvet curtains, illuminating the strained faces of my family. My brother Michael sat rigid, his hands clasped, a picture of false humility. Aunt Carol dabbed her eyes, though I knew her tears were for the potential loss of inheritance, not for Grandpa. And me? I was a coiled spring, outwardly serene, but every nerve ending thrumming with anticipation. This was the day we'd finally learn who got what from Grandpa Richard's substantial estate. Grandpa had built Sterling Holdings from the ground up, a real estate empire that started with a single apartment building and grew into a formidable conglomerate. Everyone knew his favorite, the apple of his eye, was Michael. Michael, with his earnest eyes and his can-do attitude, always eager to please, always saying the right thing. Grandpa saw himself in Michael, a younger, less jaded version. He often spoke of Michael taking over the company, of carrying on his legacy. And me? I was just the granddaughter, the one with the sharp wit and sharper ambition that Grandpa, bless his traditional heart, found a bit unsettling. The lawyer, a man as dry and unyielding as the parchment he held, cleared his throat. We are here today for the reading of Mr. Richard Sterling's last will and testament. He droned through the usual legal preamble, but I barely heard it. My gaze was fixed on the leather-bound will, a document that held my future, or at least, the future I intended to have. I'd worked just as hard, if not harder, than Michael. I'd sacrificed just as much. Why should he get everything just because he was a man? A slow burn began in my gut, fueled by years of being overlooked, of being the second choice. Finally, the words I both dreaded and expected arrived. To his grandson, Michael Sterling, Richard Sterling bequeaths the controlling interest in a majority of the company's shares in Sterling Holdings. A cold wave washed over me, then a surge of white-hot anger. Grandpa's words, echoing in my mind from a conversation weeks ago, solidified the betrayal. It's time for Michael to step up, Clara. He's ready. Ready? I was ready. More than ready. I spent years in the trenches, learning every facet of that company. Michael was still wet behind the ears in comparison. The injustice was a bitter taste in my mouth. But then, the lawyer continued. And to his granddaughter, Clara Sterling, he leaves a minority stake, along with a significant cash sum. A significant cash sum. A consolation prize, a slap in the face. My hands clenched under the table, nails digging into my palms. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I would not be cast aside. If you're enjoying this dramatic turn of events, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories. The day after the will reading, the city seemed to mock me. The perpetual hum of traffic on Fifth Avenue felt like a chorus of unheeded whispers. I walked through the financial district, past skyscrapers that belonged to men like Grandpa, to men like the one Michael was about to become. The bitter taste in my mouth had been replaced by a chilling clarity. The company shares were not yet his. The legal process would take weeks, if not months. This was a window of opportunity, and I was going to exploit it. My first target was the head of IT, a quiet, unassuming man named David, who had been with the company for 20 years. He was a creature of habit, and I knew his habits intimately. He took the same lunch break every day at noon at a small deli around the corner, always ordering the same turkey sandwich. I met him there, a friendly, casual encounter. "David," I said, a warm smile on my face that didn't reach my eyes. "Mind if I join you?" He looked surprised but nodded, and soon we were talking about the company. I was a master at this game. I praised his dedication, his loyalty, hinting that a person of his caliber was often overlooked. The flattery worked like a key in a lock, and the information I needed began to pour out. I learned that the digital records of the share distribution were still in a state of pre-finalization. A series of electronic approvals was required before the transfer could be officially logged with the state. The final approval came from a secure server managed by a single administrator, David. I also knew that David's home life was a source of stress. His wife had been ill, and the medical bills were mounting. He hadn't asked for help, but I had a solution. I subtly steered the conversation to my legacy project, a philanthropic venture I was considering. I mentioned that I was looking for a trusted, discreet partner to manage the funds, someone who deserved a chance to get ahead. David's eyes, so guarded moments before, now held a flicker of hope. I had him. The shares weren't stolen yet, but the path to them was now clear. The following week was a blur of calculated moves. I spent every day with David, listening to his frustrations, building an illusion of trust. I didn't just talk about the philanthropy. I showed him the paperwork, the fake fund created specifically for this purpose. I made it real, tangible. The pressure of his wife's medical bills was a weight I could easily lift, and he saw me as a savior, not a schemer. I was weaving a web, and he was walking right into it, willingly. The night of the planned action, the city was shrouded in a typical New York downpour. The rain hammered against my windows, a fitting soundtrack for what I was about to do. I sat in my luxurious apartment, a place paid for by my family's money but never truly earned in my eyes, and waited for David's call. When it came, his voice was a nervous whisper. "I found a window of opportunity, Clara. A system maintenance is scheduled for midnight. I can make the changes then." My heart pounded against my ribs. It was happening. I talked him through the process, feigning ignorance, asking him to explain it to me like I'm a child. He walked me through the digital interface, the multiple layers of security, and the final access points. He was so proud of his work, of the system he'd built. His pride was my weakness. I instructed him to change the recipient of the majority shares from Michael to me, promising him a generous donation to his wife's medical fund once it was done. The lie felt so natural, it almost tasted like the truth. After he finished, a wave of relief washed over him, a sense of having done something momentous, and for a good cause. He hung up, and I sat in the silent apartment, the rain still lashing outside. The shares were mine now. The company was mine. The silence felt heavy, a foreboding quiet before the storm. I had won, but the cost, I was beginning to realize, was more than just a few words on a computer screen. The news broke 2 days later. I was in a board meeting, a meeting I wasn't supposed to be leading, when a panicked assistant burst in. "There's been a breach," he stammered, his face ashen. "The company's share registry. It's been altered." A stunned silence fell over the room. My heart hammered, a drumbeat of triumph and terror. I kept my face a mask of shocked concern. Michael, who was also present, looked bewildered, then horrified. "What do you mean altered?" he asked, his voice shaking. "I'm the majority shareholder. The will was clear." A senior board member, a man named Mr. Thompson, who had been a close friend of my grandfather, looked at me with a suspicious glare. "According to the digital ledger, Clara now holds the controlling interest." Michael's gaze snapped to mine. His eyes, usually so trusting, now held a raw, wounded confusion. "Clara?" he whispered, as if the answer was impossible. I feigned a look of equal bewilderment. "I don't understand. This is a mistake," I insisted, my voice steady, my lies well rehearsed. The will was very clear. The seed of doubt had been planted. Thompson, who had always seen me as ambitious, seemed to believe I was behind it. But the evidence, the cold, digital truth, pointed to my name. The following days were a whirlwind of investigations and accusations. Michael was under fire. As the named heir, the suspicion naturally fell on him. The board questioned his integrity. How could a security breach happen under his watch, right before the shares were to be legally transferred to him? His reputation was crumbling before his eyes. He tried to argue that it was a malicious act, an attack, but who would benefit? The answer was right there on the screen. He came to me, his face etched with exhaustion and pain, asking for my help. "You have to believe me, Clara. I would never do this." I put a hand on his arm, a gesture of false comfort. "I know, Michael. We'll figure this out. I'm with you." The words were a bitter irony, a final act of betrayal. I had won, but standing there, watching my brother's life unravel, the victory felt hollow. If the tension in this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button to catch all the chapters. The transition was smoother than I could have ever imagined. The board, faced with a digital ledger they couldn't dispute, had no choice but to recognize me as the new CEO. Michael was quietly sidelined, his reputation too damaged to hold any position of power. He withdrew from the company and soon after, from the family entirely. I was the new face of Sterling Holdings, the woman who had saved the company from a hostile takeover. The narrative I crafted was brilliant and effective. I painted myself as a victim of circumstance, forced to step up to protect my family's legacy. My first few weeks in power were intoxicating. I moved into Grandpa's old office, the one I used to sneak into as a child, dreaming of this moment. I made bold, decisive moves, selling off underperforming assets and investing in new, high-risk ventures. I was ruthless, efficient, and, for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. The old guard, the men who had once looked at me as just the granddaughter, now nodded in respectful agreement when I spoke. They saw a woman with a vision, a modern leader. The loneliness of the corner office was a small price to pay for the power I now held. I saw Michael once, at a charity event in the city. He was a shadow of his former self, thinner, with a perpetual look of sadness in his eyes. He stood at a distance, observing me from across the room. I felt a pang of something. Not regret, but a flicker of a memory of a time when we were kids, playing on the lawn of Grandpa's estate, when our biggest worry was who would get to ride the pony first. I quickly dismissed it. This was the cost of greatness. I had chosen my path, and there was no turning back. I held the reins of power, but the weight of that power was heavier than I had anticipated. The company was mine, but the family was gone. The euphoria of my victory began to fade, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. The city, once my oyster, now felt like a cage. Every time I saw a news report about Sterling Holdings, a part of me braced for the other shoe to drop. The initial rush of power had been replaced by the constant low-level thrum of paranoia. I found myself looking over my shoulder, checking my email multiple times a night, convinced that someone would find the evidence of my crime. The luxury of my penthouse felt suffocating, and the silence in the evenings was deafening. My friends were now just business contacts, and my family, my real family, no longer spoke to me. Aunt Carol, who had always been a close confidant, now treated me with a chilly politeness that was more painful than open hostility. The company itself began to face headwinds. A risky investment I had championed started to sour, threatening to wipe out a significant portion of our capital. The board, once so eager to follow my lead, was now asking tough questions. I found myself lashing out, snapping at my staff, unable to delegate or trust anyone. My flawless facade began to crack under the pressure. I realized that while I had been great at seizing power, I hadn't been prepared for the responsibility that came with it. I had spent so long fighting for control that I had no idea what to do with it once I had it. One evening, I received an anonymous email. It was a single line. "I know what you did." A cold dread settled in my stomach. The fear I had been suppressing came rushing to the surface. It wasn't Michael. It had to be someone from within the company. A new, terrifying thought took hold. I wasn't just losing my family and my peace of mind. I was about to lose everything. The empire I had so ruthlessly claimed was built on a foundation of sand, and a single gust of wind was all it would take to bring it all down. The anonymous emails continued, each one a little more detailed, a little more threatening. "Your little friend David is talking," one read. "He's tired of being your pawn." My blood ran cold. I immediately tried to contact him, but his phone was disconnected. The feeling of control I had so carefully cultivated evaporated in an instant. The hunter had become the hunted. I realized David hadn't just helped me. He had recorded our conversations, kept copies of the original files, and meticulously documented every step of my betrayal. My arrogance had been my undoing. I had seen him as a tool, a means to an end. And now he was turning the tables. Simultaneously, the board of directors, pushed by the mounting losses from my failed investment, began to demand answers. A formal audit was launched. I knew it was only a matter of time before they discovered my fraudulent transfer. I was trapped. A lion in a cage with no one to turn to. The city outside, so full of life and opportunity, felt alien and hostile. I found myself walking the streets at night, a ghost in my own life, haunted by the specter of my impending downfall. The final blow came on a gray, overcast afternoon. I was in my office when the door opened and Michael walked in. He looked different. He wasn't the broken man I had left behind. There was a quiet strength in his eyes now, a resolve I hadn't seen before. He was holding a file, thin but heavy with purpose. "I know," he said, his voice calm, devoid of anger, which was more terrifying than any rage. "I know what you did, Clara. David came to me. He had everything." My carefully constructed world shattered around me. There was no denial, no feigned innocence left to hide behind. The jig was up. The company, my family, my life. I had gambled it all and lost. The truth is out, but what will be the final price? Subscribe to the channel to find out how this story ends. The silence in the office was deafening, punctuated only by the distant sounds of city life. I looked at Michael, and for the first time, I saw the true extent of the damage I had caused. It wasn't just about the company or the money. It was about the brother I had lost, the family I had shattered, and the trust I had so carelessly thrown away. "Why, Clara?" he finally asked, his voice cracking with a pain that was more profound than any anger. "We had everything. A loving family. A legacy. Why couldn't you just be happy?" My carefully constructed defenses crumbled. All the bitterness, the years of feeling overlooked and unappreciated came pouring out. "Because it wasn't enough," I shouted, the words echoing off the polished walls. "I wasn't enough. Grandpa always saw you. He talked about you, about your future, your legacy. I was just an afterthought, the significant cash sum. I worked just as hard. I deserved it." My voice was raw, a desperate plea for him to understand. But as the words left my mouth, I realized how pathetic they sounded. It wasn't about what I deserved. It was about what I took. Michael's expression softened, but the sadness in his eyes deepened. "He loved you, Clara. He was just old-fashioned. He wanted to protect us both. He always said your ambition was a double-edged sword, that it would either make you great or destroy you." He laid the file on my desk. "I'm not here to get revenge. I've found a way to undo the transfer, but the company's reputation, it's shattered, and our family, it may never be the same." He turned to leave, and in that moment, I felt a desolation so profound it took my breath away. He wasn't even angry. He was just heartbroken. And it was my fault. The unraveling was swift and brutal. The audit revealed the fraudulent share transfer, a clear act of corporate malfeasance. The board, having already lost millions on my high-risk investment, had no patience for a disgraced CEO. I was removed from my position, escorted from the office with a box of my personal belongings. The walk of shame through the hallways I had once commanded was the longest of my life. The whispers and knowing glances of my former employees were 1,000 daggers. The company I had stolen was now lost. The public outcry was swift and unforgiving. The media, which had once praised me as a visionary, now painted me as a greedy, manipulative villain. My face was plastered on every news outlet, my name synonymous with deceit. My phone rang constantly with calls from lawyers, journalists, and former business associates, all wanting a piece of the story. I unplugged it all and retreated into my penthouse, the very symbol of my stolen success. But the walls felt like they were closing in. The luxurious view of the city I had once seen as a promise now felt like a taunt, a reminder of everything I had lost. I tried to reach out to Aunt Carol, but her number was blocked. My former friends had scattered, unwilling to be associated with my public disgrace. I was completely alone. The city lights at night, once a beacon of opportunity, now felt like the cold, hard stare of a million strangers judging me. I had everything I had ever wanted, the shares, the power, the company. But in my pursuit of it all, I had lost everything that truly mattered. I had traded my family, my integrity, and my peace of mind for a title and a fortune that was now nothing but a legal liability. The rain began to fall outside, mirroring the tears that streamed down my face. My victory was my greatest defeat. A year later, I live a different life. The penthouse is gone, sold to pay for legal fees and restitution. The company shares I had fought for are back in Michael's name, who, with the help of Mr. Thompson and other loyal employees, has begun the painstaking process of rebuilding Sterling Holdings. I heard he's doing well. The news reports are filled with stories of his quiet resilience and his commitment to restoring the company's integrity. He is the true heir, not just by will, but by character. I, on the other hand, am a ghost. I live in a small, quiet apartment in a modest neighborhood, a world away from the gleaming towers of Manhattan. I work a simple job, one that requires no titles, no power, just hard work. The money is enough to pay the bills, to buy groceries, and to keep a roof over my head. I have no friends, and my family, understandably, has not forgiven me. The silence that once felt so suffocating now feels like a deserved punishment. I have all the time in the world to reflect on what I did and the person I became. I often walk to the park and sit on a bench, watching families play, watching brothers and sisters laugh together. It's a painful reminder of what I had and what I threw away. My ambition, once a source of pride, is now the root of my deepest shame. It didn't just hurt Michael. It poisoned me. I see now that Grandpa's words weren't a rejection. They were a warning. He knew the cost of that kind of ambition, the loneliness and the emptiness it could bring. My suffering is not an external punishment. It is the natural consequence of my own choices. The company shares were never the prize. The family and the love I had was. And that, I realized too late, was a fortune I could never steal back. I will spend the rest of my life paying the price. If this story touched your heart and made you think, please subscribe to the channel for more human dramas and emotional journeys.